Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Business Equity for Indy Learning and Talent Opportunities Summit, or the BEI Summit. I'm Fiddian-Green, President and CEO of the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation. I am also co-chair, along with Dr. Adrienne Sims, VP of Talent Management at One America, of the Business Equity for Indy Learning and Talent Opportunities Task Force. The Fairbanks Foundation is pleased to underwrite today's summit, which is focused on addressing how employers can play a role in addressing education and workforce disparities in Marion County and statewide, and really advancing the work of the BEI and our task force, which is focused on education and workforce outcomes. We are also so grateful for the ongoing partnership of the Indianapolis Urban League and also the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative. Their team has been instrumental to the development of our recommendations and are key partners as we work on implementation, ensuring that employers across central Indiana and beyond are implementing some of the recommendations our task force has put forth. Our task force spent last year analyzing racial disparities in education and workforce outcomes in Marion County and statewide, and also developing specific action steps that employers can take to help address those disparities. We released a report summarizing our analysis and these recommendations in November of last year. Our task force believes that businesses of all size can and should play a critical role in supporting the success of Black and Hispanic children and adults here in Indianapolis and statewide. Doing so will be good for those individuals, their families, and their communities. When students are better educated, they can find better jobs as adults. With higher pay comes the ability to earn a livable wage and help strengthen the Indianapolis and our state's economy. And closing the education and workforce gaps is also good for businesses. Almost every employer in Indiana is struggling to find the talent that they need. Growing the supply of people in our community who have the education and training that they need to participate in the workforce will help our state's employers and our economy thrive. As I mentioned earlier, our task force developed a set of recommendations that we released last November. The purpose of today's summit is to drill down on 3 priority recommendations and hear from employers and other community partners who are already taking steps to implement these recommendations within their own organizations. The 3 sessions today's summit will cover are: first, how employers can help their employees access high-quality early learning programs; second, how employers can provide work-based learning opportunities to high school students; and third, how we can help connect high school students and the adult workforce with post-secondary education and training opportunities. Our objective is for attendees at today's summit to walk away with really clear action steps that they can go back to their organizations and implement hopefully all 3 of these priority recommendations in the near future. These actions should have the dual benefit of helping to close racial gaps in education and workforce outcomes in Marion County and statewide, and also helping to strengthen your company's talent pipeline. Thank you for joining us for our 3rd and final panel discussion for today's Business Equity for Indy Learning and Talent Opportunities Summit. We've already had 2 great panel discussions earlier today around early learning and work-based learning for high school youth. And we're going to close it out by talking about post-secondary education and training for high school students and for adults. Last November, the Business Equity for Indy Task Force released a report that showcased really stark disparities impacting Black and Hispanic students and adults in our community in terms of their education and workforce outcomes. And that's a challenge here in Indianapolis and also statewide. And one of the root causes of those disparities is a lack of access to post-secondary education and training for those individuals. So our 3rd panel is going to focus on that topic, and we're going to hear about ways that employers can get engaged in supporting high school students and also the adult workforce in getting those really critical post-secondary experiences to help them upskill, earn a better wage, and ultimately help our economy thrive. Our panel this afternoon features Dr. Aleesia Johnson, Superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools, Joe Wood, President and CEO of InvestEd, and Dan Peterson, who's the Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs for Cook Group. Thank you so much. Welcome, and I'm glad to be with you this afternoon for what I know is going to be a great conversation.
Thank you.
So let's get us started off with you, Aleesia, hearing about a school superintendent perspective. There are so many things we could talk about in post-secondary education. One of the things we focused on in our report was around how do we make sure that students are actually enrolling in post-secondary education out of high school. And one thing that we found is that there are lower rates of enrollment for our Black and our Hispanic students. One of the factors that is driving that is low rates of completion of the free application for federal student aid, also known as FAFSA. And for those of you who don't know, that's a requirement if you want to be able to access either federal or state financial aid and scholarships. The student has to complete that if they want to then apply to college. So let me ask you about IPS. First of all, tell us about IPS. How many students do you have enrolled? What's the demographic of your student population?
Yes, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. So we are about 31,000 students that we serve across our total IPS family of schools, that I like to call it. About 18,000 of those students are in schools directly managed by our district team. So we also have charter partners who are part of our family of schools as well. About 40% African American, about 30% Latinx, about 20% white, and then that final 10% is Asian, multiracial, Native, so a super diverse, racially diverse district. About 21% of our students are English language learners, and about 17% of our students are students who have a diagnosed disability. And then finally, about 65% of our students are categorized from low-income backgrounds or households. So you can imagine both the diversity that exists across all of our classrooms, as well as some of the challenges that sometimes our students and families face as well.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the rundown of who we are.
That's great. And we could spend an entire day on Summit talking just about you and everything going on at IPS, but we're just going to focus down on FAFSA. So tell us about the FAFSA completion rate at IPS, and how does that compare to other districts in our community?
So I did some real-time tracking with a person on my team to see just where we are. It's really been a focus of ours as a district because, as you pointed out, how critical and important it is to be that link into the post-secondary experience for our students. So I have some CIG data and then some IPS data. So according to Commission for Higher Education, across Marion County right now, and this is real-time data, we're at about 30% of our students having completed the FAFSA. The state is about 38%, so if that gives you, an idea of sort of where we are proportionately. In IPS overall, according to CHE, we're at about 35%, so not too far off the state track and a little bit above the Marion County rate. We also do our own internal tracking. So literally there's a tracker that my team has week by week, school by school, what those completion numbers are looking like, because what we know is what you measure determines what you treasure. So folks understand if this is something we're monitoring, that means it's something that's really important to us as a district. So our post-secondary readiness team has been tracking specifically our students who we know are sort of most eligible or ready for that next step. So for example, students who might be in a self-contained classroom, they are deliberately on a different path. And so we pull those students out of our numbers as well as our students who are being served in an alternative setting. So when we take those students and remove them from our cohort, we actually are sitting at about 40% of our students having completed the FAFSA, which isn't where we want to be, but certainly is moving us in the right direction. And so really proud of those efforts our team has put in. It is an effort to even get to that point at this point.
Well, thank you for that very helpful background, and that's exactly where I want to drill in. So you just told us about the demographics of the population you serve, very diverse, and you haven't even talked about the various countries that folks come from and lots of different languages.
Yes.
So tell us, what are the challenges that you see facing your students of color, specifically your Black and Hispanic students? Why aren't they completing the FAFSA at rates that you'd like them to be completing them?
Yeah, we have a number of reasons we hear. I just met with our high school principals on Monday, and we were talking about this very issue. Sometimes the challenges are similar, but sometimes different. And so if we think particularly about the Latinx community, for example, oftentimes families may shy away from completing this federal document if they have concerns about their immigration status. They don't want to share that kind of information. And so that's, again, those conversations about sort of reassuring families that it's okay and the value and the importance of that form. But even then, sometimes there's just a lot of hesitancy to share that kind of information. Oftentimes for families, they may be the first, that student might be the first in their family even going through this process. Right. I come from a pretty well-resourced family, and even my parents, it was like, okay, we got to figure out how to do this, and what do you need, and get the tax form. All of those pieces can be really overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a family who's doing this for the first time, as may be the case for a number of our Black families or Latinx families, that can feel extremely overwhelming, and you really need someone who's going to walk alongside you and say, it's okay, it is overwhelming, so we're going to validate that feeling and then help get it done.
Yeah.
And so we provide some of those resources as well. And then I think sometimes it's just a confluence of the different systems that we know people of color oftentimes experience, those systemic challenges and barriers. You take all of those stressors that you already are experiencing in your life and then throw in, okay, now I got to do this form. It can, quite frankly, get deprioritized on the list of things that you're trying to take care of for your family. So it's really this sort of mix of making sure you can come alongside families as well as provide them with the education and awareness of why this is such a critical part in that process of what comes next for their child.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I love you measure what you treasure. I'm going to have to use that going forward. So you mentioned that you're doing a lot. This has been something that you're focused on as a district. Can you tell us what specifically you're doing that you think is actually making a difference and helping more students enroll?
Sure. And there I have a whole list. I won't read the whole thing.
Okay, great.
So I think one, the importance of partnership, and so partnering with other organizations who are also passionate and focused on this work. So La Plaza and the Latino community, the Indiana Latino Institute, Indy Achieves, are just a few of the organizations who we've worked, InvestEd, who we've worked with as we've gone along the way. We have, for our English language learner family specifically, folks who are bilingual and are making those calls so we can make sure we're having conversations in a family's native language about the importance of this work and working alongside them.
Yep.
We've had, again, the monitoring happening at our school so they can see where they are, prizes for completing the FAFSA, mailers sent home, calls made home, a video that we actually created for staff so that our staff and teachers understand how they can come alongside and reinforce this message of why this is important. And then I talked about some students who may not be positioned to take the FAFSA for whatever reason, also having sort of a video and a module for them to complete about why thinking about that next step in their post-secondary experience is so important. So it's sort of been a all hands on deck, let's blitz, let's pull all the levers we can, track our progress, so then over time we can see what do we feel like we get the most bang for our buck and continue to move the needle.
That's great. And you said partnerships, which I love to hear about, and I know employers tuning in think of themselves as those partners.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of employers that care a lot about your students and what's happening at IPS. So are there specific things that an employer could do to come alongside students at IPS to help them with their FAFSA completion journey?
I think they can. I think it's really about creating that sort of culture and experience of helping our students think about what comes next. I have a life after I finish school, and what do I imagine that life to look like? And so everything from, speakers coming in to talk to classrooms about what they do and what their journey was and how they got there. A number of our schools host mock interview fairs. And so that's not exactly the FAFSA, but again, it's let's have this experience, and now we can talk about why the FAFSA is important if you want to then take this next step. We also have employers who come into schools and say, whether you're going to a traditional, 2-year or 4-year college, whether you want to get a trade, all of those things require some level of post-secondary certification. Right. And we know the FAFSA can be important even in those certificate pathways as well.
Right.
And so employers can, again, be that additional voice saying, we'd love to have you, and here are the steps you need to take to join us. And so how can we help you sort of make that path and help students visualize that future for themselves?
And we will be following up with resources for employers so they can figure out how to connect with Dr. Johnson and folks at IPS. So stay tuned for that information. I'm going to turn now to you, Joe. InvestEd. What is InvestEd? Tell us about your organization.
Sure. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah.
What a tough act to follow. InvestEd's an Indiana-based nonprofit. This is actually our 5th decade. We were founded in 1980 as a state-sponsored nonprofit with the goal of making education affordable and accessible around the state by providing funding solutions and decision support for folks when they're enrolling, when they are enrolled in education beyond high school, and even after they complete. The beauty of our organization is that we have flexed, the world has evolved since 1980 quite a bit. Right. So we've been able to flex with it, so to speak. And certainly one of the things we've talked about is over the last 20 years, we have really become a force for literacy engagement in terms of FAFSA completion and things of that nature. And we do a number of events at IPS and work with their counselors to build curriculums and those sorts of things. So.
And your reach is statewide?
Statewide, all 92 counties. We're approaching 750 FAFSA completion, financial aid literacy, after the FAFSA, which is one we do for students after they've enrolled. And we not particularly, but by a consequence of our people reaching out to school counselors, we do roughly 40%, I think, of our events are in free and reduced lunch areas. So we're hitting folks who may be first generation, students of color, Latino students, the whole gambit.
So you just mentioned that you actually do partner with IPS. So can you tell us more specifically, what are some of the things that you do to come alongside a district like IPS? And since you work in all 92 counties, you work with all sorts of different types of schools. Tell us about what that looks like.
Yeah, for our group, like I said, about 750 events over 92 counties, I think it is. Typically, we talk about literacy. We partner with the counselor communities. The counselor community, some more active than others, some have different needs than others, so we let them drive the curriculum. A county in northwest Indiana might be different than a county in southeast Indiana. You know, how those schools manage their populations and the things that they need. So our team reaches out to their counselors and they get together with them. We see that a lot of the same pushback that Dr. Johnson mentioned as well from various groups about, you know, how they feel about providing information. But we try and meet people where they are. That's why a number of years ago, there was this big push, you know, why don't you develop an app, do this, do that? And we thought, you know what, we don't really feel like that's as effective as what our people can do. And we have former financial aid people, college financial aid people. We have former folks from the commission working for us as well. They're brilliant. We have the best group of people you could ever ask for who are passionate about this, and they are absolutely passionate about helping students and their families, particularly folks who really are struggling, trying to find their path.
Yeah. So an app for someone is not going to be helpful. The high-touch, relationship-based counseling is really what's going to make the difference. Okay. So you said that the barriers that Dr. Johnson talked about are very similar to what you see. Is that consistent around districts in Marion County? Are there differences?
I think the biggest barrier that we see is perception.
Okay.
Folks will go, well, it's too hard, it's too complicated, it's too difficult, which is why we made a decision several years ago that we would meet people where they are. And if that was by phone, we would do it that way. If it was by email, we would do it that way. We've employed chat during the pandemic. We went to more of a virtual event. We quickly turned to virtual. I think our staff kind of looked at me one day and goes, there's a pandemic, we can't go on live events anymore. I go, oh, sure we can. We can Zoom, we'll go do that. And they're like, oh yeah, we can do that. And we wound up turning a corner on that in like less than 2 days.
That's great.
So we've missed very few events. But the biggest problem is perception. People don't think they qualify. They don't think there are enough dollars for them. I know one of the great stories that Bill Wozniak, our VP of Marketing, tells is he's an experienced media guy unlike me. So he goes on all the TV stations during FAFSA season. You'll see Bill talking to all the anchors around the city, and he and Angela Gluneau were having a conversation, and she was like, well, I don't qualify. And this dialogue went on for a couple of years. And just this past year, she went through the process, and her student wound up getting scholarships.
That's great.
They were kind of, where she never expected that would be possible. That's the barrier we try and break down the most, is that, you know what, you got to go through the process to see what you're going to do.
Yeah, okay. Well, as our task force was looking at the pipeline data, saw that there were too few Black and Hispanic students enrolling in college, figured out that FAFSA was part of the problem. You were so helpful as an organization and really helpful to our task force. You actually created a toolkit geared toward employers around the FAFSA. So thank you so much for suggesting that and for creating that. And that will be sent out after this event to employers. It's already on the BEI website, but we'll make sure that everyone gets a copy. So tell us, what is in that toolkit?
I won't get into the specifics of it, but I will tell you what it does. What it does, what it was aimed at was solving the most important and essential tasks that a family had to do to complete the FAFSA, to do their college search, to work through that process. It really is a process, and you have to do that, and that's what the toolkit was designed to do.
Okay.
Help them master the essential tasks so they can keep the ball moving down the field.
Right, and the theory is employers have a captive audience with their employees, many of whom have kids that are thinking of going to college. So that's another way we can get the word out through schools, through community-based organizations, and then through employers.
Very much so.
Okay,
Very
great.
much so.
So a couple other ideas I know you and I talked about, how else can employers play a role? The Commission for Higher Ed, FAFSA, you have a big, college completion, FAFSA, there's lots of social media, but still you need help boosting your message to make sure it gets heard. So can companies amplify with their social media channels and communications?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Our guys tell me all the time, and I push them all the time, look, we should engage more with the chamber and the folks down there and their employer base. One of the things we've talked about is that this is really, what we do can be a free benefit for companies around the city and around the state. Yep. I think we all know that it's the 2025 goal. We're not going to be able to do that just with college graduates. So that a lot of adults are going to need to reengage and things like that. So the corporation having a captive audience, you get parents who have children, you have adults who want to be retrained or want some more credentials, you have people who just graduated who might be trying to figure out their postgraduate financial life. Right. And we do all that, and we're happy to partner with them. And they can walk through or contact our folks at investedindiana.org or call W. Wozniak at investedindiana.org or 317-715-9002. If you just reach out to Bill, he'll connect them with the resources they need.
Okay, so it's really helping connect with the benefits department to say this is yet another benefit you're providing to employers.
And we post, I think we post in social media every single day, multiple times every single day. So if companies want to join that parade, just retweet me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And was that Bill's cell phone number or was that your cell phone
That's
number?
Bill's.
That's what I want. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Bill's.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Joe. Okay, so far we've talked about high school students and FAFSA and how do we get more high school students to enroll in college. Now I want to turn to the incumbent workforce, the adults that are already at the place of employment. So Dan, first tell us a little bit about Cook Group, and then I'll drill down on the specific benefit program you offer to your employees that we want to learn more about.
Well, thank you, Claire. And as the others have said, it's nice to be with you. Thank you for the invite for us to come along in this very important conversation. Really appreciate it. So Cook is it's a wonderful place. Spent a long time there. We'll be 60-year-old company next year. We're about ready to celebrate our 60th anniversary. Was founded by, as many people know the story, was founded by Bill and Gail Cook in their apartment in Bloomington, Indiana in 1963. And it's grown today to a 12,000 employee, still privately held company with locations all across the globe. And primarily it's a life sciences, if you will, company. Most people know it as a life sciences company with our primary roots, and the biggest part of our business is in the minimally invasive medical device space and all aspects of that across multiple medical disciplines. We have a number of other parts of our company. Part of the group, but that's our primary focus. We're Indiana, obviously a Bloomington founded company. We're an Indiana-based company, Bloomington-based company, but we have reach across the state as well as across the globe in that we have multiple companies in Bloomington, we have multiple companies in West Lafayette, and a growing presence with a couple of facilities here in Indianapolis. So we employ people all the way from no high school degree all the way up to PhDs and MDs, as you can imagine, in a highly technical industry.
Okay, great. Well, as our task force was looking for ways that the employer community could help address some of these racial disparities that our analysis uncovered in education and workforce outcomes, we learned about something that Cook Group has been doing for a while. So I'd love to have you explain that to our audience, and I'll just set it up quickly that it's helping the incumbent workforce upskill, get additional post-secondary degrees and credentials. So tell us about what that benefit is that you provide to your employees.
If I can take just a second to go a little bit broader than just that part of the program. What we started here a few years ago, and I give all the credit to our CEO, Pete Yonkman, as he came into his role as the new president and CEO, spent just an inordinate amount of time going across the globe with others on the team, talking to employees about what are their issues, what are their challenges, what are their great opportunities, and how can we support them better. And a number of takeaways from those important discussions that took a long time to really work through. A number of things came out of that. and it's going to be consistent with what you've heard before. Meeting people where they are with the challenges that they have,
Yep.
and working as partners with them to help them achieve their goals. So we came up with a program called My Cook Pathway. My Cook Pathway eventually will have multiple facets to it, but in a sense, what it's intended to do is to help people break down barriers, achieve opportunities, deal with challenges so that they can advance as far as they want and as effectively as they want. The educational piece of things really was kind of the first part of the My Cook Pathway piece, and it was by looking and listening to people, what we recognized was there are a lot of folks that would really appreciate and take advantage of advancing their educational levels to advance their goals, but quite often life challenges got in the way, if you will. The easy choice isn't always the right choice,
Yeah.
or the best choice. And so what we said was, what we recognized, we'd always supported folks with, going back, continuing their education, et cetera, had very, good tuition reimbursement programs, et cetera. But what we recognized was that we needed to help them, in a sense, facilitate that. So we created a couple of different pieces of My Cook Pathway. One is a program to help people who don't have their high school diplomas actually get that through a high school equivalency, where we pay them for 40 hours a week. They work for 20, and then they study, and we provide tutoring and materials for them to get their high school equivalency. Once that's done, they move into a full-time position with all the benefits and additional pieces of that. The next piece is we recognize that folks, it was not always easy to access post-secondary education. They may have had a tough history with it. They may never have had a history nor in their family. So we started partnering with post-secondary institutions, Ivy Tech, Western Governors University, et cetera, Purdue Global, and created programs with them to allow our folks to easily access those degrees, those certificates, et cetera. And the additional piece I think that's really important is we also looked at what were the challenges with why folks weren't taking advantage of, say, the tuition reimbursement program. And one of the things we learned was that quite often the traditional method of having to upfront the cost themselves, go through the course, get a C or better, get reimbursed, was often very difficult. It may not have been the only challenge, but combined with other life challenges, it often was the barrier that kept people from doing it. So we flipped the program and said, we're going to actually front the money, we're going to pay up front, or we're going to work with the institution to defer the tuition until it's completed. So we took the front end money off the table for the people. We eliminated the clawback, which is a traditional method of within tuition reimbursement programs. We did a number of things to help facilitate that. And what we found is that we went from under 100 people a year taking advantage of our program to about 1,500, 1,600 people a year taking advantage of it. So pretty dramatic increase over just a few years of doing this type of work.
Well, that's incredible. So why on earth would a company want to put in that investment? And can you give us a sense of what kind of investment that is, and then how you as a company think about ROI for doing that kind of program?
Why would we do it? I think there's multiple answers to that. Number one, as I mentioned, we're a company that highly technical. You've got folks all the way from no post-secondary degree and the jobs that are aligned with that, all the way up to PhDs and MDs. Always a challenge to find people. Best way to find a person in a given role is to bring them up through the operation. So, of course, there's that kind of straightforward. We're always better off educating our people and helping them, if they so choose, to want to pursue and progress in the company. That's always the case. Another piece, and there's probably multiple, I think, answers to this, but another piece would be we're very tied to our communities, as most companies are. We're, obviously we're in Indianapolis here in a smaller sense and more recent sense, but we've traditionally been in Bloomington, West Lafayette, smaller communities, and you're so intertwined with your communities. So many, and a lot of them, kind of long-term more rural communities that traditionally don't have the same inflows and outflows of people.
Yeah.
So our belief is if we educate someone through our program, they go on to something else, more power to them, better for our community. Who knows when how they might impact us and others within our company going forward. So lots of benefits. We have good examples of people who came in and started through our program, going on, and their passion was always to go be a nurse. So they go back to nursing school.
Yeah.
We all know how important it is to find nurses in our communities. So we look at it a little more holistically, I think, is how we judge that.
So the ROI, as you think about it, may not be the traditional calculation,
Correct.
but it's helping with your workforce grow your own, which is a really critical strategy for a lot of employers. But it's also just paying it forward in the community and helping your community strengthen.
Yeah, and I think we look at it as not just doing it for the sake of doing it or because it's the right thing to do, from a philanthropic standpoint. It's also good for us. Mm-hmm. In the old days when you thought about these tuition reimbursement programs, and we got to be careful, we got to build in a clawback because somebody might come in and use us to get their education and then go leave for another dollar. Or, you got to have clawback in there, and you think about it, and I think, you may get burned occasionally, but in a sense, but think of the loyalty that those folks, because you're meeting them where they are, you're partnering with them. Think of the loyalty that can build and should build along with other things to bring back. So we're looking not so much at financial metrics, but we definitely are looking at we started and doing a really wonderful job of really engagement surveys with our employees and really trying to get deep into what are the things that are important to them, how are we seeing trends and patterns in that, looking at the career progression, back to the point of promotion, looking at career progression of folks that have gone through these educational programs, how are they going? So in a nutshell, with our partnerships and the tuition assistance programs that are out there, we're not first dollar in, we're last dollar in a sense. So, part of that whole package, we help facilitate that. It's not just the financial piece that we're looking at.
Yeah. Employee retention,
exactly,
loyalty, and then you're getting
Watching
a better
their
skilled
progression.
workforce that
Exactly.
helps you serve your customers better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how hard was it to make these changes? You already had a benefit program, or it was a traditional one with the clawback and reimbursement. Was it a lot of effort, or was it fairly straightforward to go about implementing this new approach to your benefits program?
I think part of it was just getting over the mindset, back to the perceptions and mindset of kind of thinking about these things in a different way.
Yeah.
Back to the clawback, thing a little bit, trying to thinking about it in a more holistic way. So getting beyond that, and then actually, we had help from other companies that were implementing things, so we learned from others. We certainly had our own creativity around how we would put that together, and again, in this micro pathway, which I think is just a critical piece of looking at it, again, holistically, not just individual components, but how does it affect people. So it's not been that horrible or that costly or that challenging to implement. There's a lot of great partners from Postsecondary to others. The one, I think, couple things we learned is it's really important for the educational piece to dedicate enough resources internally, a person or persons that are really charged with the program to really make sure every day that it's working as it should be, and to work and help kind of work between the student, if you will, and the institution. Because again, there are, these folks typically may not all have the same level of experience with educational institutions, so they need some help, and that's what we can provide. It helps things sustain and progress, I think. So we certainly wouldn't under invest in that, but we're not talking huge investments by any means.
And then last question for you, and then I'll ask the two of you something similar. So what we're talking about is a benefit program that an employer provides to every single one of their employees, so regardless of gender, race, ethnicity. The focus of our task force and the summit today has been trying to help address racial disparities in Marion County and statewide. Do you think that if more employers took the approach that Cook Group has taken, and really viewing it as an investment not only in the company's pipeline of a workforce, but also the community, do you think that if more companies were doing it, that could play a role in addressing disparities in our community?
I totally do, because again, I just go back to that meeting people where they are, and the ability to look at and understand that not everybody has the same level of background or barriers or comfort level in moving forward with their education, with their career. So I wouldn't say from my perspective that you would just completely duplicate something for the sake of duplicating it. It has to be customized to the population you're working with,
Right.
and recognizing that additional support that's needed to help facilitate one person at a time, in a sense, with navigating that, the barriers that they're dealing with, I think will work and should work.
Great. Well, thank you for explaining that, and thank you for Cook's leadership on this and many other fronts, including your recent partnership with Goodwill here in the Indianapolis community.
Talk about that one for a long time.
Yeah, I know you could.
And we're happy to help talk to anyone about how not everything's perfect. We learn from as we go.
Okay, so we'll
We're
send
happy
out
to
Dan's
talk about
personal home phone number out. So thank you,
what's
Dan.
your guys'
That's right. Okay, well, and turning to you, I mean, again, you serve all students who come in your door, and so do you as well.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that we've talked about here today do you think that could actually help address the racial disparities that are unfortunately so prevalent in our community? Are there additional things employers could do? You mentioned you partner with Indiana Latino Institute, Urban League, CLD. Could employers maybe come alongside InvestEd, a district, and one of those organizations and have more customized outreach sessions? I'd love to just kind of wrap up with your recommendations for what more employers could be doing to help address disparities.
Yeah, I think all of that is right. I think for employers to think about who are those organizations. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. The point of this is not to your point, sort of take what people are doing that's working and then use that. That's totally fine, and you should do that. So I think it's Urban League, we know, has a vested interest in the African American community. Tap their expertise, tap their connections and resources. Same thing for La Plaza or Indiana Latino Institute. We've done that as a district because they help us do our work smarter and better. And so where you can have as an employer a particular area that's your expertise, excellent. Now pair that with someone who can go alongside you to reach the community who you want to specifically target. The other thing I'll say though is all those strategies we use are amazing for everybody. And so we know they have specific importance for the Black community, for the Latinx community, but obviously those are strategies that help us move the needle for all of our families.
Right.
And we want everyone to win. But we know we need to pay special attention to communities where we know there are historic disparities that we have to pay attention to and name.
Yeah.
Same here. I mean, we have the same partnerships, with the Latino Institute and CLD, and the Commission for Higher Ed has a number of programs that we work with them on. It really, from our perspective, it really is a matter of just continuing to, I don't want to say hammer the message that education beyond high school, and it doesn't necessarily have to be college, it can take a number of forms, but it really does unlock the future for these students and their families. And you have to continue to hammer that and partner with people. We'll partner with anyone at this point. If people want to do something special for their employees, we've had a few of those engagements where people wanted to work harder to get their students, their families educated about what the process looks like.
Yeah.
And we're pretty big about the process because, where we fit in is a process, right? So that's the best for us. But I think you can't talk about it enough. I don't remember who said it, but they said, how do you win the battle of mission? You keep saying the mission over and over, and then when you get tired, say it again and again and again, and that's what we have to continue to do. I mean, right now you're hearing a lot of press about students, and well, I don't know if education beyond high school is for me. Well, it's the majority of people. It's for them.
Okay.
There's an opportunity out there waiting.
That's right. I think we have one question in the chat. 2 questions. Okay.
Are there metrics that demonstrate the effectiveness of various events and interventions to improve FAFSA completion?
So the question was, do we have metrics that show what is actually working to improve the FAFSA completion rates? And I'll take that from, I guess, either of the two of you.
I'll say that we track all of our events and initiatives. We track those metrics to see, again, what is that return on investment. And so if we're holding an event at a school in partnership with them, and they're probably tracking the same thing.
They are.
How many folks showed up, how many applications did we get completed. Our schools are tracking that, and then we're looking at that from a district level again. So we know what to do more of and then what to modify.
Yeah,
Great.
we're doing the same things.
Okay.
And this question is for Dan. Did you find that when you took on the risk instead of the individual taking on that risk, that there ended up being a higher rate of success? To say that when people no longer perceive their failure as a barrier, if I don't do well, I'll have to pay back this debt and have nothing to show, they were more likely to participate and do well.
So the question, to repeat, was when Cook made that change in basically de-risking the individual and putting the risk on Cook by removing the clawback, paying the education costs up front, what did that do in terms of outcomes that actually help those adults succeed in obtaining their post-secondary degree or credential?
Yeah, a great question, and I appreciate it. I don't have quantitative numbers in front of me on that, but I can tell you that you can, in my mind, you can look at the increase in folks that are taking advantage of this resource and how that's grown from, again, under 100 to about 1,600 people right now taking advantage of that. So again, that's, to me, that's just absolutely evidence that the program is headed in the right direction. Their performance, their ability to fulfill and succeed, of course, I think is the ultimate proof, but I don't have those numbers right in front of me right now, but that we've certainly seen that by all means across the board.
Well, we hope today's panel provided you with inspiration and also concrete ideas of things that you can take back to your organization. And again, we're going to follow up with an email from the Indy Chamber with a list of resources, contact information, so that you as employers can figure out how to make changes within your own organization and then reach out to the schools in our community and partners like InvestEd, Urban League, Latino Institute, and others to try to help make a difference for outcomes for Black and Hispanic students. Thank you so much to Aleesia, to Dan, and Joe for all the amazing work that you do in our community, for taking the time to be with us today, and for offering, in some cases, your employee's cell phone, in some cases your own, but ways that we can help the employer community, all of whom are interested in trying to uplift people in our community, not only for their own workforce, but for the community at large. So thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Aleesia Johnson, Superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools, Joe Wood, President and CEO of InvestEd, and Dan Peterson, Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs at Cook Group. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to be with us.
We want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. I want to thank all of the Learning and Talent Task Force members and panelists who contributed their time and expertise today. One of the things we're trying to accomplish today is to let you know about all of the resources that you can tap into to be the change for Black and Hispanic students and adults in our community with specific ideas and resources. We hope we covered some things that are very actionable for your company or your organization. Again, I want to thank all of the panelists, the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation, and all who have committed their time so far to this cause. We're trying to build almost a community of practice because we've realized as a business organization, even though we're on our own journey of getting better, supporting more inclusive economic growth, many of our members and businesses in the Indianapolis region are counting on us and our partners to help them navigate. And so I really, really hope that we've triggered a lot of ideas for your company to get more engaged in this work. So we got one more slide with some contact information so we can help keep you connected to this work, so that you can remain engaged and learn more about implementing these racial equity strategies in your company or organization. We're going to ask you to fill out the Learning and Talent Implementation Form on our BEI website, or click the QR code that's provided right here on this slide. So you can find it on the BEI website or the QR code that's provided. We're also inviting our, literally hundreds of Indy Chamber members and other Central Indiana employers to visit the Business Equity for Indy website to view the recording of today's event. So if you heard something you thought was interesting and you're thinking, I've got a colleague that really needs to hear this message, that will be provided immediately on that website. And that website is businessequityindy.com. That's businessequityindy.com. While you're there, you can explore the other Business Equity for Indy task forces, sign up to stay informed about other BEI events, and explore stories from other regional businesses who have stepped up their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a really exciting time. There are a lot of great companies and organizations doing great work. So if you're a company thinking, I don't even know where to start, we want to be a clearinghouse for that and make a connection to a company who has put that kind of a strategy in place, or maybe it's a community organization that your company can partner with. Anyway, we're incredibly grateful for all the time that you took today. So thank you to the Learning and Talent Task Force members, all of our panelists. Please go to businessequityindy.com. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you so much.